99% of AI startups will be dead by 2026. That's the claim in this article. I think this article goes all over the place. Lots of facts, lots of fiction, in my opinion. Just like this old school Magic the Gathering card, if you know what I'm talking about. And the Primeagen actually covers most of this article. And I'll put some jump links in the description below to specific parts where he comments on it if you want to go into detail. We'll watch a few of his takes. I think he has some pretty good takes, although it's very much from the programmer's perspective. And I think some of his answers are correct but incomplete, and I'll help round out some of the reasons and some of the realities behind what the arguments that are in this article that are generally interesting, but I think also sometimes very, very good arguments, valid, but also not correct. So there's some major issues with this article. Okay, he starts off with a preamble about how 25 years ago he was at Sun Microsystems in 1999 and .com boom and bust essentially, and he says we're in the same place. I think there's some validity to that, but at the same time there's definitely some significant differences, which he goes into right here. And he starts off and he's talking about basically startups are pitching wrappers. And he doesn't really define what a wrapper is, although I think he makes this assumption that just about everything that is AI is wrappers. I think he's saying at least 99% of those are wrappers, and we'll come up with our own definition here and use that to kind of distinguish between different types of companies. But I think he lumps all of the AI companies that are not like OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, Anthropic pretty much into wrappers, which I think is not very useful and not correct. I think there's a lot of AI companies out there adding real value that use AI as tools or large language models as tools, and to call them a wrapper would be a bit of a stretch. And so based upon that assumption, he builds this house of cards that the argument itself is a house of cards, although somewhat correct, especially when we talk about Nvidia owns the chips that power it all. That is correct. And Primeagen says, hey, can we all agree that Nvidia is the big winner here? I don't think that's the way I would put it. I don't think Nvidia is the big winner. I think they are a big winner in this scenario. They're the most obvious, the most reliable bet for the future, more so than OpenAI, probably more so than Microsoft. Although typically in business, the creator of the finished product that assembles all the pieces into a unique combination and sells it to the final end user is where a lot of the value is captured, and then everything else beneath that often gets more and more commoditized, which we're already seeing with OpenAI and the models that are being produced. I don't know, if you take the same prompt and you put it into the latest from OpenAI, the latest from Anthropic, the latest from Google, the latest from Meta, and all the other companies, a lot of times, at least if you put the top tier models in, you'll get just about the same response out. And what we found is even some of the smaller companies, their models sometimes are just as good as some of these big model companies. The word is out on how to build these, how to do the thinking models, and how to build the core fundamental general models. Some people think OpenAI has a moat in that area, or just in general, that's already showing the models are being commoditized. So I think one way to look at this would be, there's a really interesting metaphor I've heard before, so I didn't come up with this, but it's like, think about like a Pop-Tart. I'm kind of changing a little bit, where there's one company that makes all the strawberries in the world, or like 99%, maybe more like 90% of the best strawberries in the world. So when somebody sells Pop-Tarts, who makes that money? The company with the stronghold on the strawberry supply, yes, but then the final company that assembles the Pop-Tart and sells it at margin at the end. Those are the two organizations that really benefit from that. I think that the wrappers, defining all AI companies as wrappers, which is basically what he's doing here, is inaccurate, and I think there will still be a lot of value captured. Now, if it is truly a wrapper, as he's going to show below, a company, then they are at risk and they're not really adding a lot of value. They're basically just reselling the strawberries in a different packaging and adding a little bit on top of the strawberries. Maybe it's more like chocolate covered strawberry companies. Maybe that's not quite as much of a value add. Most so-called AI powered tools are just a pretty interface wrapped around OpenAI's API. You know, I think this is a really big assumption he's making here. And I think there is some validity to some of these companies, and maybe this is what he's looking at, but I do see other companies actually adding value to the process that's not just some front end with an AI call. I think this was true, much more true with stuff that came out right after ChatGPT came out, like 2 years ago. And I can see other companies. I know within our company, when we build stuff, there's a lot of other code that's beyond the AI. A lot of our what we build is maybe about 25 to 50% AI. And we're not just calling one thing. A lot of times we're calling AI with very particular prompts at very particular times, kind of split up into smaller pieces with a lot of code in between. And he gives this example of a product that was like, he's comparing it to $69 per month. And he's like, hey, I can just make this product. And Primeagen has a really good metaphor for this. It's like the programmer's problem, where, and I'm gonna put a jump link to it. It's about 7.5 minutes into his video. To me, I'd say that there's a very significant lack of systems thinking. Primeagen points out the lack of value of time, not considering the value of conveniences, even small conveniences. I think a lot of people focus too much on the technology and they don't understand kind of the business aspect of it, or where some of the actual leverage points are for customers. Again, he continues to repeatedly they're just prompt pipelines stapled to UI, no backend, no IP, just API calls on Rails. Yes, there are some like that, but to assume that all companies are like that, I'd be willing to bet that there's a lot of more complexity behind some of the products that people are building than what you see on the surface in terms of how they handle things. And ultimately, a lot of people have said SaaS companies are basically just databases with a UI on top of it, but those have made lots of money for lots of companies and added a lot of value to customers. And it goes really far off the deep end, I think, here to call it dishonest. I mean, if they're lying about what they're actually doing or the value that they're adding, then yeah, or it's not a product disguise. Again, lumping all of AI companies into one bucket of wrapper that's dishonest, disguise, no value actually added. Give me a break. This is like almost childish type of thinking. He's making huge assumptions and painting the whole landscape of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of companies with one broad stroke, and it is pretty much nonsense. Again, nonsense for a large amount of companies, and as a broad argument, it is nonsense. And in Primeagen's example, he asks, can your product be easily copied? I would say that doesn't even go really far enough, because really you could copy Twitter right now, the actual product of it. Does that mean all of a sudden you're going to have the customer base and the market base for Twitter? Having your product being able to be copied isn't even necessarily the main aspect of the product. So the actual code isn't necessarily where the value is. Sometimes it is. Sometimes there's technology that's behind the scees that it is incredibly valuable. And he brings up Cursor AI as an example, which is basically a fork of Microsoft's VS Code. Microsoft very easily could have done Cursor. It's basically VS Code with some integrations and a little bit of extra technology behind the scenes. And that's incredibly valuable. And OpenAI just bought Windsurf for, what was that, $3 billion. Everyone treats OpenAI as untouchable. I mean, no company is untouchable, in my opinion. Even Nvidia isn't untouchable, even though they have a very, very strong position. And when he's saying everyone, that's not me. I've been commenting for 2 years about how there's a reasonable chance that 10 years from now, OpenAI has been a company where they helped us start this AI, and people will be grateful for them, but they might not actually make money. They might actually be crushed by open source models, the commoditization of models. And in my opinion, the real value, as I pointed out, is actually in how do you use models as tools? How do you use LLMs as tools within systems, which is getting largely ignored right now. And this is something I've been saying for years. And there's other people out there who are saying the same thing. I'm not alone, and Primeagen happens to be one who says it kind of from a different angle, from a coder's angle. They're exposed, but I don't think because of the wrapper agent. I think they're exposed because of the commoditization of models and the lack of significant progress, despite what people seem to think, in what large language models could do. There's a lot of things are about to come, saying that's coming out of the foundation model companies, but ultimately, their value is diminishing extremely rapidly, and it's very expensive to run them. And there's a reasonable chance that they will all be out of business within 5 to 10 years, but not for the wrapper reason. And we'll go into a little bit more detail in a second. So his argument is that 99% of these wrappers will go out of business, and therefore 99% of OpenAI's income or something on par with that will disappear. First of all, the idea that 99% will go out of business, I don't think that's necessarily accurate. Now, 99% of the companies as he's defined wrappers, which is basically it's basically just an API call with OpenAI with a little bit of window dressing. I would agree with a large percentage of those are going to go out of business, but there's tons of other people who are building off better foundations for companies. And this is true at all times, all the time. There's a ton of people doing surface level things with little value to try to get quick gains, and it actually ends up not being stable and not being long-term for them. But also he's missing the point of, let's say it's true that all these wrappers, 99% of them will fail. What about that 1%? That 1% scales and more than offsets the 99% that lost. And so they end up making more money from that 1% than they would from that other 99%. Additionally, there will be new AI companies coming in around every day, and they'll get better and better at actually creating real value. I think that the ability for us to understand how to use large language models as tools, we are still just in its infancy. And as time goes on, we'll get better and better at it as a group. Just think about it like this, like no one's ever seen a sword before, and you come out and you have somebody who's just invented a samurai sword. We don't suddenly know how to use the samurai sword. It takes training, and LLMs are far more complicated than samurai swords. So I think that's kind of the state we're in, and that is where I think a lot of the value will come. And then there's an additional issue with his argument, which he says OpenAI does not own the user. Well, actually, a lot of their revenue comes from ChatGPT, and a lot of the user is actually the coders who use their API. So to say that they don't own the user is largely incorrect, or at least there's a significant chunk of it that is incorrect. So I don't think that's really accurate. I don't even know if this is accurate either. Do they own the intelligence? If you consider how commoditized the models are already, and they'll probably get more and more like that. Do they actually own the intelligence? I don't even know if that's true. There's a lot of copyright issues that still are up in the air. Maybe they don't own maybe that takes that down even further to where they own the intelligence even less. And then he's using such strong assumptions. Everyone's pretending, blah, blah, blah. Like, bro, just like calm down. You know X number of people, and you're assuming that small sample size is everyone. And it's somewhere around this point that Primeagen says that he thinks this article is 90% correct. I would disagree with that. I think that he has some valid points, but the way he's putting it together and the conclusions that he's making are wholly incorrect. And the idea to where the whole intelligence of the article falls apart. It's like he's trying to build a car, but you're missing really key parts, or you're putting the steering wheel on the bumper and the engine in the back seat. It just doesn't work. This whole argument falls apart real quick on this front. If wrappers go down, OpenAI's reach shrinks. No, not true. Again, some products that are AI powered will grow and will sustain. Just like in the dot-com era, there were companies that made it through to the other side and made a lot of money. Amazon, for example, stuff like that. And those by themselves will be enough to offset this on top of the other factors. So this is, does OpenAI have the moat as well? No, I don't think OpenAI has much of a moat at all. I think actually the biggest moat is their ChatGPT customer base. The amount of people paying for ChatGPT Pro and the data that they're getting from people using ChatGPT is probably their biggest moat. But the actual models, even though they are essentially a foundational model company, I don't think there's really any moat there, or if it is, it's dwindling very quickly. But it has nothing to do with the fact that there's a lot of AI wrappers out there. Then he builds just another false narrative. Take your input, send it to GPT, parse the response, drop in a UI, call it a product. Yes, there are people doing this, but is this everybody? And also, just like in any market at any time or in any scenario, there's all sorts of other, just take any moment in time. 50 years ago, there were people doing a similar process like this that was unsustainable. There's always people out there looking for short wins that don't build a stable foundation. This is just human nature. That's basically what he's describing here, and saying that this is all what everybody's doing, and that's just nonsense. This is not what everybody is doing in this market, or at least it's not what if he's saying that the companies that do this are not going to last, or much less likely to last, I think there's a lot of truth to that. But as Primeagen points out, this can still work if you're adding any value at all to the customer, making their life even a little bit easier. Then a wrapper can actually be valuable. I think it's less likely than the more value you can add, and the more it's not just calling an API with a front end. the more likely you are to sustain. But there still will be a lot of companies that succeed with this path. Personally, I don't like it, but saying that that's all they're doing is a gross understatement. Still think I'm exaggerating. Here's what most of the products are doing under the hood. Yeah, if you're doing this, where this is your whole product, and from the back end standpoint, but to me, that's not really doing much. And at least at my company and other companies I've seen have gone well beyond this 2 years ago in actually building complex systems using AI in much more complicated ways with actual code, doing a bunch of different stuff, parsing the data, and there's just a lot of code there that actually does new things. So if we take a step back and look at, so if you want Primeagen's perspective on coding, that's the perspective he gives in his video, and I think it's very useful. But he's talking about using AI to actually code. What I'm talking about sounds the same, but it's different. I'm talking about using AI within code to solve non-coding problems. Usually, that most of the problems we solve involve processing data. I've been processing data with and without code, with my brain and without code for 20 years. And there's new capabilities that LLMs have created that we can use within software to solve problems that couldn't have been solved with software before. Okay, that is very real. Now, are there challenges? Are there issues with LLMs? Absolutely. The hallucinations and its reliability when it's got randomness built into it is a very real issue. But there's ways to systematize that out, and that's with good code and prompt engineering and essentially AI engineering. And so there's a ton of people doing way more than this to suggest. Of course, you're exaggerating. Again, if this is what you're doing, then probably you're not as stable as other companies. And it's not just if you're not copyable. You could have really great marketing, and that can be the value of the company. If you have really great marketing, you sell, and people get value out of it, or even feel like they get value out of it, more power to you. There's a lot of companies that make a lot of money doing that. I mean, just look at what's the value of Coke, right? It's sugar in a bottle, sugar and carbonated water in a bottle. They're a gazillion-dollar company, though. So this can work, but to suggest that this is all that most of these products are doing under the hood, I think is inaccurate. I would also suggest just speak for yourself here. If this is your idea of what you can do with AI, that's skill issues, right? There's a lot that can be done with AI. AI enables new solutions that couldn't have been done 5 years ago. That is a fact. And if you don't see that, which actually I think a lot of people still are adjusting to that new reality, and they're looking still at LLMs as just chat from a chat perspective. They're not looking at them as solving problems or solving key things that couldn't have been solved before. And so I still think there's a lot of creativity left to be done, a lot of understanding and catch up on the human side of how do we use these new tools? How do we use this new samurai sword that's very complicated? It takes us time to develop, to move in that direction. That's what me and my company have been focused on. And so I know that there's a lot to be done in this area. So I think this is pretty absurd. I think I know why Primeagen stopped his reading of the article, because this guy repeats himself. No IP, no system, no matter. Again, lots and lots of assumptions here. Most of the AI product landscape could be rebuilt. Again, man, this is such a sweeping generalization. I think that's pretty ridiculous. And also, there is some validity to some of the products. Maybe you could say the same thing about major SaaS products, but I still think that he's underestimating how complicated it is to really build good software, and some of the things that seem simple on the surface, but that actually there's a lot of complexity and work that goes on behind the scenes. And he says the same thing over and over again. They're just middlemen, and middlemen don't last. Well, that's not true. There's tons of examples of middlemen lasting for years. Bankers are basically middlemen. There's tons of middlemen business models that have worked forever. So that's just wrong. And OpenAI doesn't need them to last. And at least they don't need anywhere near any significant percentage of them to last. Even if a small percentage of them last, that's still fine for them. And he cherry picks some examples down here of, yes, some wrapper type of companies that do a little bit more than his just that Python code he gave. But of course, you can always find a sample of bad things if you're really looking for it. And then he says, it's who built beyond the wrapper. I think that's true for a lot of the companies. Again, there still will be some successful wrapper companies, but yeah, he's kind of contradicting himself here. There's a ton of companies that are not building just as a wrapper. And then he talks about Nvidia, the silent kingmaker. Today, Nvidia is the most powerful company in AI. I'd say that's true. And I think that a key factor here in this statement being correct is that he says today. This is not necessarily going to always be true. There are other companies trying to make GPUs. It'll take a long time for them to catch up. They have CUDA, which is kind of a stranglehold on that. But at the same time, over time, that the GPUs will be less and less valuable to get more and more commoditized, especially as the models get better and they get more efficient. And all other factors get more efficient, then Nvidia's profit margins will be driven down significantly. I mean, I think it'll take 10 or 20 years for that to really play out. But to this idea that Nvidia is always going to be in this position, I think is inaccurate. There are some concerns about Nvidia being in this position for sure. And he points them out. And those micro points are correct here. Again, go back to my strawberry Pop-Tart metaphor. It's like Nvidia is the company that owns all the rights to all the strawberries in the world. But but nobody's really figured out how to make the strawberry Pop-Tart yet. Or at least very few companies have been able to figure that out. There's still a lot of companies left to make variations on the strawberry Pop-Tarts. And so those companies will be able to make a lot of money, and they'll have a moat. And how much of a wrapper around the strawberries are they really? We'll see. It's weird he calls them the quietest, most absolute choke point in the industry. I think this has been well acknowledged by lots of people for the last several years that Nvidia is like the big obvious winner from this situation, and they're going to do just fine kind of no matter what happens. I think he's correct to say that OpenAI is at risk again, but he's right for the wrong reasons. He calls out Microsoft here, and I think it's a good point. Microsoft has done some really smart plays, and it does look like they've kind of put themselves in a position where they kind of win no matter what happens as well. Even if OpenAI fails, they still have gotten a lot out of them. And OpenAI has essentially, I think a lot of their investments has come in the form of Azure credits. So it's not like they actually paid them directly that money. It's not quite the same thing. And I think to some extent there's some value in OpenAI actually spending those credits on Azure. I think they've gotten insight into what's going on in OpenAI, and so they get a lot of value out of it. But it still remains to be seen where Microsoft will fall in this, because if the models are commoditized, it's unclear how valuable that extra insight is. And if the owning and running of GPUs becomes more commoditized, again, where's the real value there? I think Microsoft has played this pretty well. And he correctly identifies that Nvidia is a point of fragility for all sorts of reasons, and he brings this up multiple times. I think this is significantly reducing over time, but right now it's a very significant issue, and he'll cover that in just a second. Here are his black swan events: the hardware choke. Let's say, this is most of these chips are made in Taiwan, and there's some semiconductor factories in Taiwan, which China technically thinks that they own, and Taiwan thinks they're separate, and it's unclear how that's going to go. And if China decides to just say, you know what, we own this manufacturing, it's unclear exactly what would happen there. If they just sent soldiers in and said, we're going to take over all these chips, you're not going to send any of them to the United States, what would the United States do? It's hard to say. So there's some real issues there, and a lot of people are working to try to unlock that, but that's a very real issue that would hurt everybody in the AI space. So this is correctly a kind of like a single point of failure. And I think it's similar to the regulatory snap. The paradigm shift is pretty different. I think LLMs at the core of the transformer technology has major issues. And those issues point point towards a new technology, a new type of model, potentially completely unseating LLMs. Maybe that new type of model doesn't use GPUs. Maybe it goes back to classic CPUs. Maybe there's a different type of processor that it works best on. So that does, but that's a little bit different than Nvidia choking the AI space. What that means, it just shifts, that just hurts Nvidia. That means that Nvidia isn't completely safe. And if you look at what, I think 2 years ago, Sam Altman was like, by this time, by 2025, we'll have hallucination solved. That's not true. There's still a lot of major issues with LLMs and a lot of things that I think are fundamental to how the technology works that are not solvable or not reasonably solvable with the current core technology. You got to think about how when systems interact as a whole, if they try to fix this part, it can actually create, you can create a positive effect over here, but it creates a negative effect over here. There's no perfect system, and oftentimes there's trade-offs that you have to make. So this is a different shift. This could hurt all of the companies mentioned so far. Actually, the companies at the top of the chain, the people that make the final product, are the least likely to be hurt by this paradigm shift. In fact, they might benefit the most from it, improving their products, maybe improving their costs, unlocking this bottleneck, unlocking Nvidia's stranglehold on things, maybe unlocking these these big foundation model companies. So this is not really put in the right context, I don't think. I skipped to some of his repetitive points. He goes into infrastructure wins, but no one's building it. I don't think that's correct. I think LangChain is trying to build some of it, at least from a software standpoint. I think there's a lot of other infrastructure like that isn't just software that people are trying to build. I think he's saying, I don't see anyone building it, which is not the same thing. I want to jump back to this point. He's talking about the worst players on the space and painting this broad brush. What matters is optics, screenshots, traction charts, investor decks, showing hockey stick curves. Yeah, that might be what matters to a lot of people. I personally don't care about that. I don't care about the TechCrunch mention. I care about adding real value to customers and revenue growth and profit growth, essentially, at my company. And I think that's kind of the correct approach. And again, I think he's lumping all of the AI companies into the bad actors space and assuming that they all work in the same way, or that 99% plus of them do, which I don't think is accurate. Okay, and Primeagen stops the article about 85-90% in, is like, this guy's repeating himself, and he's true. I didn't read the last section to you guys, but it's him saying kind of the same thing from a different angle. He does go into a little bit more. He has an integration rant where how there's real value in just kind of integrating things into the right place, into where people actually work. I think that's sometimes marginal value, sometimes real value. And he does use AI to code, but for specific things. But there's this one part that I really wanted to play that I think is really useful to understanding his perspective on the AI models, and it's very telling. So I would suggest that you watch this next part, and I'll put a jump link to it below. But basically, if you think that AI models are moving super fast, and you're looking at the benchmarks, and the benchmarks are defining what you think are actually moving forward in terms of, now the model's way better at this and that, and it looks like it's moving forward. I've been saying for a while now that this is a mirage, that they're taking a narrow slice of the value and the realistic practical usage of the models, and they're kind of picking that out and going, hey, here's these numbers. Let's take Primeagen's perspective on this, and he's talking about this largely specifically about using AI to code, but this is more broad to other things as well. In fact, the AI model companies have been focusing a large amount on coding specifically because they are coders themselves, and they think that also is kind of where they get the circular, amplifying, self-fulfilling loop going. And this is worse in other areas in terms of the benchmarks not really revealing their real world value. And that is why I can say the LLMs have not really improved that much since basically GPT-4 came out. So let's see what he has to say about this.
Okay, I don't care if somebody's like, this thing's like the 50th best coder. Like, I don't care. Your measurement of being a best coder is crap. Okay, I produce software that I have to use and maintain and make better. That has nothing to do with your little nice little benchmarks. Oh, your nice little benchmarks. Oh, wow. Right? Benchmark maxing is hella cringe. Right? You're absolutely right. But yeah, I agree with it. They're not. They don't make any difference in my book. I don't use them. Like Claude 3.7.
Okay, before he goes into one of his examples, benchmarks matter in certain ways. I think that it's really the meaning that people are getting out of the benchmarks is not correct. Early on, being able to take a benchmark from nothing in certain areas to something non-zero or 20, 50, 70 can be meaningful, but it only describes a very narrow slice of meaning. And he's going to give a really great example right now in terms of coding and why he uses Claude 3.5 Sonnet and not Claude 3.7.
Did better on benchmarks than Claude 3.5, but I think Claude 3.5 is better at coding because Claude 3.7 is just like, hey, I'll turn that button red. Also notice that there's this other button that was blue, turned it red too. Don't worry, I got your back, buddy. Bam, Claude 3.7. And you're like, dog, I wanted that to be blue. All right, hey, I turned that button back to blue. Also turned that other button back to blue just for you, buddy. Bam, you're like, no, I wanted one to be red and one to stop it. Claude 3.7, right? Like Claude 3.
So he's making a really good point here about how the benchmarks do not reflect real world usage. They reflect a very narrow test-taking perspective of one very narrow slice of usage. This idea that there's going to be one model soon, anytime soon, there's going to be one model that does all the things better than everything else and every human and does all the use cases or anywhere near it is absolute freaking nonsense. Let's hear him rant for just a little bit longer.
3.7 just does extra shit all the time, and it just is so annoying. And so it's like, yeah, I get that it's way better on benchmarks, but it's not like better for me. It's way worse for me. Just saying.
Right. So this is true in a lot of other domains as well. And actually, again, get back to the fact that they are working heavily on coding as a major vector to where they're trying to improve the models. And it still isn't good enough. And a lot of people, it's weird because Primeagen gets some hate from people who are AI skeptics because he thinks that there's real world value there. Like, I definitely think there's real world value, but he also gets a lot of hate from AI believers because he is skeptical of some of the claims. And I'm with you, Primeagen. It's not so simple. It's not a 0 or 1. It's not AI is going to do everything all the time, and it's not AI has no value. There is an in-between. AI has real world issues and it has real world value. And a lot of what the next 10 years will be us navigating that and figuring that out. And that is a lot of work in and of itself, even if the models don't improve much. If all the improvement over the next 10 years is getting faster and less expensive, let's say that's it. And with marginal actual intelligence improvements, which I think is a very real scenario. That is it possible that the LM technology itself has plateaued to a significant degree? Something that, and it has definitely over the last 2 years plateaued. You don't have to even look at the benchmarks. Just if you actually use these in real world scenarios, you would know this. And there's reasons why that I've covered in a lot of my videos, and I predicted this several years ago. Then so if it continues to be at a plateau, then the value is in how to use it. But again, there's still a lot of ground to cover in that area. So I don't think it's crazy to say that there's a lot of opportunity still in the AI space, but it's not in making models. Okay, so let's circle back around to this guy's thesis, which is absolute nonsense. He's picking a number just out of a hat that is most controversial or most clickbaity. Well, I guess I clicked on it or Primeagen clicked on it or somebody sent it to him. I think the actual statistics show that only 10 to 20% of startups survive the first year. So is it 99% will be dead by 2026? That seems very extreme. Maybe if you do a subset of the 99% of crappy AI startups, which is basically what will be dead by 2026. Maybe that's correct, if that's the premise of his article. But in general, there's just a ton of crappy arguments in this article, and mixed in with some reasonable points. So let me know what you think. Did you like this article? Check out I'll put the links to the Primeagen video. Check out that video, watch the video. It's very funny, or at least watch some of if there's any of the jump links that I'll give. And I'll put little notes on what you can jump to. Watch his rants on some of those if you're curious. What do you think was fact? What do you think was fiction in this article? Let me know. Please like and subscribe if you like more content like this. And I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.